I make it a point to bring all of my planes in the shop now and then to give them a good looking over. And that procedure always starts with giving them a good cleaning up. Even if I have cleaned it at the field before I left, I like to go over them again now and do it real good so I can check all the covering and decals. Sooner or later, something's going to loosen up and it's a lot easier to fix it in the shop. The bottom of the planes always gets the dirtiest, and in the shop is the best place for me to hold it safely upside down so I can really clean this area well. After cleaning, I'll take some time with the heat gun and shrink down any wrinkles that developed in the plane. This is also a good time to find and repair any loose edges or holes that may have developed since the last time we checked it over. I use simple green to clean my planes, but that leaves a real faint haze on the covering when it dries. The last thing I do to the covering is give it a coat of this monocoat polish. It's also cleaner, but it seems to protect the finish as well as brighten it up. After the covering's done, I go over all the hinges and look for any that might be broken or loose. With everything I put these planes through, it's just not smart to expect epoxy to hold forever. If I find a loose hinge now, a couple of drops of CA usually tightens it right up. Hinges are really easy to fix now and just about impossible to fix after you stuff the plane in the ground. We also have to take a close look at all the hardware that holds the wing on and make sure that all the blind nuts and pins are locked in place. I also look the root of the wing over to make sure there's no evidence of cracking or separations. And I also go over the mount and the fuselage as well to make sure that none of these doublers are loose or any cracks like this little separation in the ply is glued back down. There's few places on this plane that are stressed as hard as where the landing gear attached to the fuselage. There's a lot of leverage applied here on even decent landings. I always use thread locker on these screws, but the wood can collapse a little bit and they'll loosen up. Once the bolts start loosening up, then you add impact to the stress and you can break a landing gear mount easily. And don't forget the tail gear mount, because those take a lot of bouncing around as well. And while you're at the landing gear, make sure you check over the axles and the tires. I replace those little set screws and wheel collars with a bolt that I can really get tightened down on the axle. Control horns can work themselves into the wood a little bit and loosen up, so we want to check all of them to make sure they're tight and all the linkages are secure. Even solid linkages have been known to fall apart if they aren't checked every now and then. And we need to check the servos to make sure that they're secure in their mounts as well. I love the Hanger 9 servo arms that have bolts that hold them to this output shaft. They also have pinch bolts on either side, and all of this makes sure it stays locked to the servo. But they can't do nothing if you let them fall out. And don't forget to check the throttle servo as well. And take a good look at the fuel system, make sure that nothing is moved or nothing's leaking. I secure all of my lines with plastic tie wraps, but I check them anyway. This piece of black tape on my receiver came from when I flew helicopters and found a couple of the wires had just about backed out of the receiver from vibration. They never move with this tape in there. Pulling the cowl also forces you to take the prop off, and that's a good thing because we need to check this probably more frequently than a lot of things. People that are new to bigger engines are often surprised to see that the washers can actually sink into the wood a little bit under the pressure of the prop bolts. That's why anytime I put a new prop on, I'm going to be checking the prop bolts pretty regular for a while. Removing a cowl isn't always the easiest thing to do, but there's a lot of very important things hiding underneath there that we need to look at. And we can start with looking at the cowl itself to make sure that none of the mounts are broken or damaged. Look over all the joints on the motor box and firewall to make sure that nothing is starting to come apart. You don't have to hit something for one of these joints to fail. Catch it now and it's an easy fix. I use thread locker on all of my motor mount bolts, but I have found one or two loose in the past. Anytime you have access to the muffler, make sure the bolts are snugged down good and tight. And don't forget these little screws and the hole in the pump cover. That hole has to be open or the pump can't work. It also can't work if the screws are loose. And while you're at the carburetor, check over the throttle linkage to make sure everything there is good and tight. Check all the engine wiring to be sure that none of that is moved and gotten to where it can get damaged by the heat. I'm a big fan of simple manual chokes, but this is also a good time to make sure that it's working the way it's supposed to. Spending a little time in the shop going over your airplane means that you're a lot more relaxed when you go out and try and tear holes in the sky with it. This hobby's a lot more fun when the plane doesn't fall apart in the air.